Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. I'm Nick Palavita. I'll be your moderator for today's program. And today's program, we're going to highlight the Federal Reserve, a very powerful institution in the United States, which determine interest rates. And you can see the power as they move interest rates up. All of a sudden, certain industries were destroyed, like the real estate industry. And when they moved it down, the stock market explodes, and of course, real estate prices go up. So they affect everybody's life in the United States and around the world. And it's something that we need to know more about. And so, with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, to explain this very powerful institution, the Federal Reserve, to the public. In other words, what is the Federal Reserve?
Well, Nick, it's good to be back with you. Let's start with the creation of the Federal Reserve, which was in 1913. First, three things happened in 1913 that fueled the expansion of the size and scope of the federal government, undercut states' rights, and gave the ability of the Federal Reserve to be able to manipulate interest rates and self-deal in our own currency. Those three things were the passage of the income tax via a constitutional amendment, the establishment of the Federal Reserve via statute, and the passage of a constitutional amendment that required senators to become directly elected by the people rather than appointed by state legislatures. As a result of that, the federal government has grown about 10 times in size as a percentage of the economy. States' rights have been eviscerated. But with regard to the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve initially was established for the purpose of trying to provide stability in the banking system and to try to be able to regulate banks. It did not have an express charter with regard to interest rates. It did not have an express charter with regard to employment. It did not have an express charter with regard to economic growth. But in 1977, as I recall, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, and it basically gave the Fed two primary missions. One, to provide stable prices, and secondly, to try to maximize employment. In my personal opinion, and I've said this on numerous occasions, I think we need to relook at the Federal Reserve Act in light of what's happened over the years. And I think the Fed should only have two mandates. Number one, promote macroeconomic growth. Let me underline the word macroeconomic growth. Secondly, to provide stable prices and modest inflation levels. That's what it ought to be doing. In my view, it's totally inappropriate for the Federal Reserve to have an employment mandate to maximize employment because the vast majority of the factors that determine whether or not we're going to maximize employment has to do with things that are beyond the control of the Federal Reserve. If we say that one of their two missions is to promote macroeconomic growth, obviously that will help with regard to employment. But most of the other issues dealing with employment have to do to things that are far beyond their ability to control, such as education policy, such as immigration policy, such as labor policy, such as tax policy, such as regulatory policy. The Fed has nothing to do with that. Now, the Fed Board of Governors are appointed by the president, and they serve specific terms. And the Fed chair is also appointed by the president and serves a specific term. They're all confirmed by the Senate or have to be confirmed by the Senate. And they're supposed to be independent from politics and from the executive branch. One can debate how independent they truly are. But the big issue right now is what's going to happen to interest rates. While the market ultimately determines what interest rates are, the Fed policy can have a significant impact on the market, especially with regard to housing, because the 10-year Fed, the 10-year rate of Treasury securities tends to have an impact on mortgage cost, if you will. And obviously, most people end up, planning on what they can afford for housing based upon their total mortgage payment, and their total mortgage payment can be significantly influenced by changes in interest rates, as it has been in recent years. And so now there's a lot of attention as to what the Fed is going to do this week when it meets with regard to interest rates. And it's got mixed signals that it's got to deal with. On one hand, unemployment is relatively low, but it's ticked up in recent months. Secondly, inflation is above the 2% target level and far below the level of 9.1% in June 2022, but it's ticked up in the last month. And so, the president would like the Fed to significantly reduce interest rates. That's not going to happen. My personal view is it's more likely than not that the Fed will end up reducing the discount rate by 25 basis points or 0.25% and not more, in large part because inflation ticked up somewhat in the last month. And there's still uncertainty about what the ultimate impact of the tariffs are going to be on prices. And of course, the tariffs are going to have to be resolved in the courts because any tariff that was not negotiated between two parties has now been ruled to be potentially unconstitutional and exceeding the president's authority. And that's ultimately going to have to work its way up to the Supreme Court within the next few months. So that's the background. I also think there has to be some limitation on how much self-dealing the Fed can do. Who's the largest holder of U.S. debt? The Federal Reserve. Because when the market wouldn't buy the debt and when the banks didn't buy it, then the Federal Reserve ended up buying it basically through quantitative easing. And it was in the process of trying to unwind that and to be able to sell its debt to the market when we started having other challenges. And so that slowed. But they are the largest holder of U.S. debt. And I think there has to be some limitation on their ability to do that because, what it does is it takes pressure off of the Congress to be able to put our finances in order, which is critically important and growing in importance every day. So with that as a background, let's kind of open it up and see what other people have to say. You there, Nick?
Oh, in here.
Hello, Nick. Hello, Nick.
Oh, there it goes. I kind of got the computer wasn't moving. Well, now it's moving. That's good. Maybe it's Mark who moved it.
Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to shout out to Tom Barkin, who's the president of the Federal Reserve of Richmond. Tell him hello. Tom is actually a personal friend of mine. He comes from the Tampa, Florida area, and he used to come to my house all the time when he was younger, and we used to play chess together. And then next thing I know, he's the head of the Federal Reserve in Richmond. I think he's looking maybe someday to become head of the Federal Reserve all the way, the Federal Reserve of the United States as opposed to Richmond, but we'll see. Anyway, it looks like Sasha has some comments from Canada, so let's bring up Sasha, assuming I can bring up Sasha.
Dave,
there we go.
Dave, you mentioned that the Supreme Court is taking this tariffs case in the next few months. No, it's taking it in November, precisely.
Okay.
And by
2
November,
months. That's 2 months.
it's
Yeah.
2 months.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we are looking at a most likely ruling that these tariffs, according to constitutions, are illegal indeed, because it's up to the Senate, or rather the Congress, to impose or not tariffs, not the president. And the emergency under what he's used as the reasons that he imposed tariffs it's completely bogus claim there was no emergency situation. Now, the most interesting things actually too are that all these hundreds of billions of dollars collected so far, because they are illegal gains, would have to be repaid, all of it. The more interesting thing, number two, is, in my opinion, that Supreme Court cannot rule that countries that collected tariffs as a countermeasures against U.S. tariffs would have to return their collected tariffs because their tariffs were collected legally, and it's not Supreme's Court business in any case. So that could be very interesting situation that many other countries actually gained from this tariffs issue. What do you think?
Well, that'll be yet to be determined by the Supreme Court. We were very fortunate on our network to have Jeffrey Schwab, who headed up that case, who was lead counsel. He came onto the Pod TV network to discuss the case prior to his initial hearing before the trial court, which he won, and then he won at the Federal Court of Appeals, and that's through the Supreme Court. We picked up the case because I believe it had merit, Sasha, that it looked like in the separation of powers, that the powers of the tariff should be rested with the legislative branch, not the executive branch. However, it's all speculation as to see what the Supreme Court's going to do. And I guess in November, we'll have the answer, whether they're going to go prospective or retroactive on that. In the meantime, we're looking at the Federal Reserve because, you know, Sasha, since you do modern investing, it's pretty important because if they lower interest rates, that sends the stock market a signal and it starts going up. I mean,
no, it will collapse. They will lower interest rates 25 basic points and the market will collapse, but it's too little, too late. The economy is already falling apart, and you will see by Wednesday, 2 o'clock, market will collapse. Dow Jones will go down 700-800 points for sure.
Well, we'll see. But let me comment on your question. Let me comment on your question first. Ultimately, the Supreme Court will decide. Several comments. You know, my view is, if you're going to declare a national emergency, it has to be for national security or public health reasons. And I think it's hard to be able to say that across the board tariffs can be justified based upon national security or public health reasons. Maybe in target areas like steel and aluminum and things of that nature. Secondly, clearly the court, I think, will differentiate between tariff agreements where the two parties have agreed to the tariffs. And as you know, there have been tariff agreements between the EU, the UK, Japan, Indonesia, and maybe a few other countries. Interestingly, there have not been tariff agreements between Canada, between Mexico, between China, between India, and some pretty big players, right? Okay.
No, David, excuse me. If tariffs are illegal, what kind of agreement could be deemed valid if it's illegal in the first place?
Let me tell you how I think they'll rule, but I don't know how they'll rule, and we'll have to wait and see. None of us on here are constitutional lawyers, although I know a fair amount about it. But I think in the end, what they'll do is that they will differentiate between negotiated tariff agreements and unilateral tariff agreements. And for those tariffs that are unilateral, that have nothing to do with national security and public health, I think they're likely to strike them down. I don't think they're likely to require them to repay the money, but we'll see. All right, I think they're likely to rule on a prospective basis.
That's what I think.
And this president, is trying to flex his muscles and is trying to, test the limits of executive power. And it's not just in the area of tariffs; it's also in the area of spending, where this OMB director is trying to rescind, or trying to unilaterally do a pocket rescission of about almost $5 billion worth of spending. And the last time I read the Constitution, the Congress has the power of the purse and has the authority to decide how much to spend. But we'll see what happens. I think Mark's got his hand up.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah,
Yes.
a question for you. Actually, I got two questions for you. One that I raised earlier, and you just kind of alluded to it and everything, but I'll get to the first one first and everything. I'm getting a lot of reports out there in media land and in newsland about, we're going to hit the holiday seasons and all along those lines, and a lot of people are feeling down in the dumps about their own personal finances, but at the same time, and I have a great deal of respect for you and your knowledge of the economy and everything, stocks are setting records. So what's up with this? Why is we're getting like this mixed messages and everything? Where on one hand, we're going to go into Thanksgiving and Christmas season and the whole 9 yards of the holiday season, but then, and people, if you talk to folks, and I talk to people all the time, are very much frustrated by the economy, but the stock market is saying something totally different.
Well, first, the stock market really only looks about 6 months out. And the stock market likes certain things that are going on right now. One, they like the fact that the tax cuts that were supposed to expire were extended. And we can debate whether that was good or bad, but nonetheless, they were extended. Secondly, they like the fact that this president is a deregulatory president, that he's trying to reduce regulatory burdens, if you will. Thirdly, they like the fact of the potential productivity gains that can be achieved through technology, including AI, and they believe that the Fed is going to start easing the discount rate over time. So I think that's why. I think individuals obviously have a little bit different perspective because they're concerned about their employment stability, okay, especially people that are in jobs that could end up being affected by AI. If you're in the government, especially the federal government, there's a lot of people that are concerned about their job security because, the president is trying to downsize the federal government. It's taken a number of steps in that regard. There's uncertainty in the world. I mean, we clearly do not have our federal finances in order, and which is something that we need to come to grips with. Mortgage rates are still too high, and therefore that has an adverse effect on the housing market, if you will, in the real estate sector. So there are signals both ways, and the tariffs, people don't know how that's going to turn out. The president complained that the Congressional Budget Office didn't score tariff revenue when it scored the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but there was only a few problems with that. The tariffs weren't in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Okay. Secondly, you didn't know what they were going to be. You didn't know which one would be sustained and which ones wouldn't be sustained. But even if all the tariffs are sustained, even if the estimates that have been given for the potential revenue from the tariffs are $400 billion a year, we're still 1.6 trillion short that we've ultimately got to come to grips with.
If I can ask that follow-up question, then I'll be done and everything. And I know we got tons of other folks, including Dr. Sharif. I mentioned earlier today on the World Edition that Wednesday is Constitution Day, and we'll be celebrating the Constitution. And you just mentioned the Constitution and everything along those lines. But I was watching News Nation yesterday, and there was a author, and I'm trying to remember the name of his book, but he was talking about this notion that we seem to be in this stagnant place where Congress doesn't seem to be doing as much as it should be doing. He felt that we have a very assertive president and everything along those lines, and a very effective, to some degree, Supreme Court, but he was not having good things to say about Congress because he felt Congress was being very stagnant. And there's supposed to be this notion of checks and balance and everything along those lines. So as I try to remember the author's name, because he's written a book that was very much along those lines that Chris Cuomo was a big fan of and everything. But I was just wondering, do you agree with him that we are having a one of our checks and balances is not doing a good job of checks and balance?
In my view, and I've said this publicly, and I think it's also in my book, American 2040, which is American2040.com. But I think Congress is a lag indicator.
Right.
Congress is not addressing large, known, and growing challenges in a preemptive fashion. It waits until there's a crisis before it acts. In many cases, without adequate due diligence and in a reactive manner. I think the current Congress is closely divided, but the Republicans control both the House and the Senate. I think they are trying to give Trump whatever he wants, and yet the Democrats are trying to deny Trump whatever he wants. There's very little going on a bipartisan basis with regard to issues. The one exception is the groups that No Labels, which I'm one of the national co-founders have put together to try to promote bipartisan communication and get some movement on issues like permitting reform, and ultimately on issues like the fiscal issue and the immigration issue, which are much bigger but much more difficult to deal with. The president is clearly very assertive. He's very emboldened. He's trying to do as much as he can, as quick as he can. And as we've said already, in at least two areas, the Congress has not been as assertive as it should be. I mean, the tariffs issue is one, and the rescissions issue, is another. So we'll see how this plays out. The president obviously can't stand for re-election under the Constitution, so he doesn't have to worry about what people think. Okay, I mean, because he can't stand for re-election again. But the Republicans in Congress have to worry about what the people think. And by the way, you're correct that Wednesday is Constitution Day. Right. I'm going to have a big announcement on Constitution Day in a press briefing about the need for Congress to call a convention of states under Article 5 to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment, because they are derelict in their constitutional duty to do that. The constitutional amendment is going to force the Congress to restore fiscal sanity and sustainability over time, because things are clearly out of control at the present point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Are we about to fall off a cliff in terms of inflation and unemployment?
Well, I think a real challenge, and there's a growing, number of economists and others who tend to agree with me. I think our real challenge is are we headed for stagflation? Are we headed for stagnant economic growth and higher inflation? I believe that it is possible to change course and to avoid, a debt crisis and to avoid stagflation, but, it's going to take concerted action. And Congress is very adept at doing nothing. When you do nothing, it's okay when things are going well, but when things are not going well and they're deteriorating with the passage of time, doing nothing is not acceptable.
So we had stagflation in the 70s.
Right.
Who took the blame for it, and who is likely to take the blame for it this time around if we have it?
Well, I think stagflation was probably, President Jimmy Carter, primarily took the blame for it. Okay. Paul Volcker, who was a friend of mine, may God rest his soul, who was, the very capable and courageous chairman of the Federal Reserve, who took on inflation, and Reagan let him take it on. Okay, he didn't try to interfere with it, and he broke the back of inflation through concerted action rather than just. Remember, before it had whip inflation, now we had the wind pens or whatever. Those are old enough to know that. I mean, the pen's not going to get the job done, and so we'll see. But I think there are no winners. The question is who's going to get more blame than the other. But the truth is, Congress is not doing its job. And Congress hasn't been doing its job for quite a while, no matter which party is in control.
Hey, by the way, just really quickly, David, the author that I was trying to remember, because I said I was going to try to remember, is actually a well-known Israeli-American conservative writer, and I consider myself more liberal than moderate, but I definitely liked some of what he said was Yuval Levin. So I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but definitely it looks like he had some very powerful words to say about the economy. So that's the author I was trying to remember.
And let me mention one other thing. I gave a speech this past Saturday over the weekend to the George Washington chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, of which I happen to be a president emeritus of, but because of my past service there. And it was on the Constitution. And the speech was about how the United States has strayed from the principles and values under which it was founded, and how we are not following a number of the basic tenets on which our nation was founded. And then what do we need to do to get back on track? And the two issues that I focused on, because time was limited, was our finances and our political system, because we now have a republic, which is a representative democracy that is not representative of nor responsive to the general public. A disproportionate number of members want to be career politicians. A disproportionate number of members are too far to the right or too far to the left of what I call the sensible center. There's little to no compromise as compared to the beginning of our country, where major compromises were needed in order to gain ratification of the Constitution, some of which were good and some of which weren't, like slavery, which fortunately over the years we were able to rectify. But Constitution Day is very important to me. My view is that every member of the House and the Senate and the president and vice president should take a test on the Constitution every Constitution Day, publish the results, and I bet you a majority would flunk it.
Probably true. We're going to go to Dr. Sharif because he had his hand up. Then we'll go to.
Yeah. Thank you. This is actually a very interesting discussion, and economics is one of the important subject for me. I just want to summarize the whole thing and try to engage with Asian economy. According to Honorable David Walker, what I understand that U.S. Federal Reserve focus on inflation plus jobs and global leaders due to dollar dominance and all of the things. On the other hand, Asian market, what I'm observing, it's more diverse. If you focus on China, this is one of the largest economy in Asia. They are more like state driven. If you focus on Japan, they focus on deflations, battle, and all of the things. And definitely, India, they are focusing on growth and inflations. But based on this federal rules, what I'm observing, Asian banks and the financial institutions, also Honorable David Walker mentioned about macroeconomics. They are more like policy driven, and they are actually close tie with the government growth agenda. So how you want to differentiate the Asian market and US market, or what is the plan of USA to collaborate or balance all of the economic things? Is there any plan or is there any issues?
Well, first, just a few comments. China is a state-driven economy. All right. Japan, there is tremendous cooperation between the government and the private sector. Through Kaidan Ren, et cetera. They, very close cooperation. India is really focused on growth. I mean, they're focused on growth. They passed China on population. They have, less demographic challenges than China has. Obviously they're the largest democracy on earth, not the oldest democracy on earth, but the largest democracy on earth. And so, you mentioned the word plan. Well, doctor, I hate to tell you, we don't have a plan. And that's part of the problem. Despite a federal law that says the U.S. government is supposed to have a comprehensive, integrated, future-focused, and results-based plan, we don't have one. Now, individual departments and agencies do, but they end up doing their own thing, in many cases beyond what their mission is, in many cases duplicating or leaving gaps, and in many cases focused on inputs and outputs rather than outcomes. And that's got to change. We need a comprehensive integrated plan that focuses on economic policy, diplomatic policy, military policy, and domestic policy. That's what we need. I'm pushing for that, along with a constitutional amendment and along with a statutory fiscal commission to be able to help put our finances in order.
So you talked about the lack of centrist voices. How do you get there? And I'll tell you one set of centrist voices that are pretty much gone. I come out of late night, and late night for 50 years, starting with Johnny Carson in the 60s, was centrist. Late night hosts did not want you to be able to figure out which way they voted. Look at Leno. You can't tell if he's a Republican or a Democrat. Kimmel, until he started getting pissed off about stuff. But now we're down from like 6 late night shows to 3. And conservatives won't watch him anymore, except for Greg Gutfeld, which is the conservative flavored one over on Fox.
Well, the media is a big part of the problem, Rick, because, we have a situation now where there are very few outlets that are truly news outlets. Okay. As I say, we have too many fact-free zones. We got plenty of people that want to give their opinion. And we also have found that there's a fragmentation of the media to where there are certain media outlets that are clearly to the left of the sensible center. We have other media outlets that are clearly to the right of the sensible center. And let me come back to something that I said before with regard to the Congress. All right. You've got too many people that are blindly following the president, and you've got others that are blindly opposing the president, right? You really have some of the same thing going on in the media. I mean, you have certain media outlets, and I won't mention which ones, that are just cheerleading the president. I mean, he can't do anything wrong, okay? And that's obviously not the case. We've talked about a few of the issues that are controversial and are being challenged. There are other media outlets, he can't do anything right. I mean, even when you get positive results, they'll still oppose him. I think we need political reforms. I think we need redistricting reform where it's required that there be independent commissions that will end up drawing the lines to maximize competition consistent with the Voting Rights Act rather than minimize competition. Secondly, I think we need integrated and open primaries. So therefore, independents like myself and about 50% of registered voters have a voice in the primaries. And if you will, parties can still endorse candidates, support those candidates, but let everybody be part of the process. I think ranked choice voting is something we need to consider. I think campaign finance is important. I think term limits is important. I think those latter two items are going to require a constitutional amendment. The earlier items do not require a constitutional amendment. And here's something that a lot of people don't understand, including members of Congress. Congress has the right under the Constitution of the United States to set the rules for federal elections. They can set the rules for redistricting. They can set the rules for voter ID. They can set the rules for some of the things that I'm talking about. But they haven't, and they need to. And then we need to pursue, constitutional amendments for campaign financing for term limits. And I'm an advisor to a group called America's Promise. Had a meeting last night, a dinner last night with the leaders and supporters of America's Promise, who are trying to get a campaign finance constitutional amendment. They're trying to encourage Congress to do it on its own. That would be great. But I think ultimately we're probably going to have to go the route that I'm going on fiscal responsibility, and that is an Article 5 Convention of States.
Can you get, that happens, can you get stuff past SCOTUS? SCOTUS has 2 hardcore conservatives who will vote with Trump every time, 3 hardcore liberals who will vote liberal every time, and then you have the 4 remaining conservative-leaning justices.
Well, one, the Supreme Court on campaign finance has already ruled that it's free speech. I don't agree with what they ruled. I think the only people that ought to be having the right of free speech with regard to elections are people who can vote. A newsflash, corporations and unions can't vote. Their employees and members can, their shareholders can, but the entities themselves can't. I think that was a mistake. But given the ruling, you're going to have a constitutional amendment. Look, if amendment is proposed either by the Congress or by a convention of states under Article 5, and if it is ratified by 3/4 of the states or 38 states as provided under Article 5, the Supreme Court has nothing to say about it. It's done. And by the way, there are 2 modes of ratification provided for under Article 5, one of which is state legislatures. The other is conventions of pledged delegates who vote for or against the amendment That's the closest thing in our country to a referendum of the people. That's what we believe should happen to the extent that there are any proposed constitutional amendments. It's been used before to repeal prohibition under in connection with the 21st Amendment. And I have little doubt in my mind that the American people would overwhelmingly approve. Doctor?
Yeah. First thing, I want to give a special thanks to Honorable David Walker because you bring very interesting things. I think uh, for my audience, because regularly I share your show in my classroom and with our policymakers, you share that USA do not have long-term plan for this economics, for diplomacy, for policy, and all of the things. Uh, that is the things also learning opportunities for Bangladeshi policymakers because what you do not have, you already share. Yes, I do not have. We can push and we can take this initiative. But my question, beside that, that if USA is one of the largest economy in the world, it has huge impact in the around the world. If USA do not have proper planning, how they can survive in 21st centuries, where there are a lot of complexities, lot of competitions, and lot of innovation happening. Uh, what's your thoughts?
Well, first, we are the largest economy on earth. We have the most powerful military on earth. We have the most diplomatic influence on earth. And we do have a lot of cultural influence around the world, in particular with regard to our media, Hollywood, etc. But without a plan, all you have is prayer. Don't get me wrong, I'm for prayer, but I'm for prayer and a plan. Without a plan, you can't maximize value and mitigate risk. And that's what it involves. You want to maximize value and manage and mitigate risk. You can't maximize value and minimize risk. That's an oxymoron. Now, in fairness, we do have a national security strategy. We do have a national defense strategy. That's probably the closest thing that we have to looking forward with regard to the national security side. But that's not enough. And even that has to be revised based upon power, based upon where the real risks are going forward, changes in warfare, which we're seeing a lot of that in Ukraine, a totally different kind of warfare as compared to what has occurred in the last several decades, if you will. But I think it's good. I mean, we need to learn from history, and we need to learn from others, and others can do that too. Just because you're number one doesn't mean you're always going to be number one. And I think we'll be a major power, but the question is, will our future be better than our past? And that's part of what stewardship's all about, Doctor. Our founders believed that we shouldn't just be living for today. We should be taking steps to create a better tomorrow. We should focus on our posterity, which is stewardship. We should always strive to form a more perfect union. And while we'll never be perfect, if we continue to make changes to try to improve ourselves over time, our future can be better than our past.
I have an interesting historical question and all along those lines, and I'm going to put it in an interesting context. I was talking on the news show earlier today that there was a survey recently of our young people under 30, and they were saying that it is okay to disrupt people that you disagree with, and all along those lines. It was like 70%. They also had a highest percentage that thought political violence was okay as well. With that being said, David, do you think that we run a risk with our young people of a new version of the Boston Tea Party? Because we know that that's what happened in that economy period, was people got upset and they went in a massive protest and everything like that. So do you think that we run a risk of there being a new version of the Boston Tea Party in the 21st century?
Well, I hope not. I mean, our country is very divided right now. And quite frankly, with regard to young people that are below 30 years old, I've got 3 grandchildren that are in that category. But if you look at the overall, class of young people in that category, when I grew up, my parents, instill certain discipline, principles, and values in me. When my kids grew up, I instilled certain principles and values and discipline in them. All right, that's not happening to the extent that it needs to happen right now. Whether you're at a restaurant and you have unruly kids that the parents don't do anything about, okay. Whether you have single parent families where the child does not have a role model, okay. Whether there be a lack of discipline when somebody clearly goes beyond the pale, if you will. So part of this is the lack of civility and the lack of being able to listen and to people with contrary views and to engage in constructive conversations with those people. They may or may not change your mind, but you should respect everybody's views. In many cases, the right answer is in between, right? I mean, not everybody's got a monopoly on the right answers. The tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk during this past week, the only thing that I can compare that to was the tragic assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, they obviously had different causes that they were focusing on, but neither one of them were elected officials. Neither one of them had any current power. They had influence, all right? They were trying to do things that they thought were right. But I think, when you get to the point where you're starting to assassinate people for their views, even though they don't have don't directly have any power over others, I'm concerned. I'm concerned because we're not exercising our stewardship responsibility. I'm concerned because civility is declining. And by the way, remember how Rome fell. Rome was the greatest superpower in its time. It was 500 years as a republic. That's what we are. But the republic fell and became an autocracy. And then ultimately the empire fell. And why did it fall? Fiscal irresponsibility by the central government, decline in political civility and moral values, overextended military around the world, and inability to control its borders. Those sound familiar? We need to learn from history. We need to learn from others. And we need to recognize reality that we've got to make some course corrections to make sure our future is better than our past.
Yeah. David, you mentioned planning, and the thing is, it still bothers me because we do broadcast to the Certified Financial Planners Group, the Financial Advisors Group, and all these people that work in the financial planning market, and there's about 80,000 certified financial planners right now. What they do is they actually do projections that take place over 5 years, 10 years, and even 20 years. In other words, so the client will see their financial picture today, what it'll look like 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. Right now, it seems to me that the U.S. doesn't have a 5-year projection, which you can do on computer programs to show basically what your debt will be, what your income will be, et cetera. You can do a 10-year program. And this is where I run into problems, is that in 10 years, because of Medicare and Social Security trust fund running out of money, I don't know how you do a 10-year projection without having a major recession. I don't see it. And you could do a 20-year and maybe there'll be a recovery in 20 years. Is it because people in Congress know that they can't really realistically do a 10-year projection without doing it? Oh no, we're in trouble. Or are they that ignorant about using Excel spreadsheets?
Well, first, in fairness, the Congressional Budget Office, at least twice a year, will do 10-year projections. And once a year, they'll do a long-range projection, which is 30 years. Okay? And the GAO, which I used to head, does a long-range projection about once a year. That's obviously got to be based upon various assumptions, one of which is they base it on current law. They don't speculate on what may end up changing in the future. And those projections have said for the entirety of the 21st century that we're on an imprudent, unsustainable fiscal path. All right. The OMB, basically, if you ask the OMB what the plan is, the plan's the budget. Well, the budget's 1 year, and it also is not adequately outcome based. And guess what? The last time the Congress worked to pass a budget and timely appropriations bills by the beginning of the fiscal year was 1996. And guess what? They're not going to do it this year either. And what's ironic about that is there's only one express and enumerated responsibility for the Congress in the Constitution of the United States. Only one that they're supposed to do every year. And that's to pass all the appropriations bills on time. Last time they did it, 96. How many times have they done it in my lifetime? 4. That's an F minus. Another example of Congress is not doing its job.
I have another question for you. Definitely, my World Talent Economic Forum majorly focus on economics. I really like economics, and I have very expert from around the world. It can be through Pot TV, or it can be through David Walker's, any institutions. And definitely, I want to contribute volunteer basis. If I have opportunities, or my team has opportunity to make or contribute for long-term strategic plan for USA, definitely I love to do that. Is there any scope or something?
Well, one of the things first, I don't have confidence of the government being able to do it on its own. And the other thing you have to understand, and Nick, I think you could appreciate this, and others as well, everybody's for transparency and accountability until it relates to them. And in many regards, I think part of the problem is they don't want to do some of these things because they don't want people to see what they might show. They don't want to focus on outcomes. They'd rather focus on inputs and outputs rather than outcomes, because the outcomes aren't good. For example, we're not top 25 in the world in K through 12 education.
Sure.
We spend more than any other country on earth on healthcare, and we get below average outcomes. I mean, I could go on, right? So outcomes, it's what it's all about. Okay, you need inputs and outputs to get outcomes, but if the outcomes aren't working, then something's got to change. All right. So I'm working on an effort right now with a prominent private sector firm to get philanthropic funding to be able to put together a strategic framework that we would end up putting together the strategic framework because I don't have confidence in government can do it. I think they can fill in the framework and operationalize it. And I think it would help the executive branch do a much better job. And quite frankly, I think it'd help the Congress do a much better job, because one of the things that Congress ought to be doing is that when they create a new program or a new tax preference, they ought to be able to say, what are we trying to accomplish and how are we going to measure success on outcomes? Mm-hmm. And that's how they ought to be saying, this is what we intend to happen as a result of this when they authorize it. So then the agencies know. And so then when they're doing oversight, when they're doing reauthorization, when they're doing appropriations, they've got a basis to make more informed decisions. Today, what ends up happening, they don't do that. And if something's not doing well, people say, I just need more money. I just need more money. Well, if you throw in good money after bad policies, you don't want to throw more money at it. Mm-hmm. But that's what happens.
Hey, David, I got a question for you that was raised on another one of our shows recently, and I don't have an answer, and neither did the person that does the show. It's actually going to re-air today because they tape it on Sunday on their YouTube, and then we air it on Mondays and everything. But they were trying to figure out I know people are looking for voices and everything. Where are the moderate Republican voices? Because they were trying to figure out who could address the MAGA crowd and everything that people would listen to that would be moderate. I know people positioned Nikki Haley, but they thought that Nikki had lost her voice and everything after losing the election and everything. So does Trump have such a lockdown that there are no moderate voices, or where are those moderate voices? Because they dropped a couple of names, including the gentleman from Texas and everything along those lines that's for prayer in school, whose name is slipping me right now and everything. But where are the moderates in the Republican Party, just like some people are wondering where the moderates are in the Democratic Party?
If you want to know who are more moderate than the extremes, okay, then go and look at who the members are of the House Problem Solvers Caucus.
Okay.
That is an official caucus of the House of Representatives that was started with the help of No Labels. It's equally divided between Republicans and Democrats. Brian Fitzpatrick is the co-chair Republican. Tom Swayze is the co-chair for the Democrats. Equal number of members on each side of the aisle. No Labels is now working to create a bicameral group, which is both bipartisan and bicameral, so meaning the House and the Senate. And that is just in the formulative stages. Historically, there have been groups like the Blue Dog Democrats, the Republican Main Street Coalition, and those were more moderate members, but they are a small fraction of what they used to be. So look at the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House. Keep attuned to when the bicameral group will be more public. It's not public now; it's just getting formed. But that is, as I said, bipartisan, bicameral.
Okay.
David, what is the probability that
Second.
they do have a what?
Pardon me 1 second. Mark, there are also organizations that rank members based upon to what extent do they co-sponsor bills, and to what extent do they try to work in a collaborative fashion. And there are groups that rate that. You might want to just Google it and check that out. Sorry, Nick. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I was questioning, what's the probability that actually having a constitutional convention to put the United States back in a fiscal responsible mode? Is this going to happen, or is this going to be another discussion and nothing happens?
Well, first, I'm not advocating for a constitutional convention. I'm advocating for an Article 5 Convention of States, which, when you look at Article 5, which is only one paragraph, it is for the express purpose of proposing one or more amendments. It is not for rewriting the Constitution. It's only to propose amendments, which would then have to be ratified by 3/4 or 38 states. Okay? I don't know anybody who's arguing for a constitutional convention. In fact, the biggest argument against an Article 5 convention is it might run away and it might try to rewrite the whole Constitution. Now, one of the things that's key about our effort is that in 1979, there were 39 active applications. You only need 34. Of the 39, 30 were fiscal responsibility only. State conventions are one state, one vote. So that means a majority of the states want fiscal responsibility only, which means they can control the scope of the convention. It won't go away. In addition, and still today, a majority of the states want fiscal responsibility only. And so my view is, let's do the most important issue first, deal with it, which is fiscal responsibility. Let's prove that an Article 5 convention can work without runawaying. And then that will put more pressure on Congress to deal with other issues that they haven't dealt with, such as term limits, such as campaign finance. And if they won't deal with it, then we'll do another Article 5 convention and we'll deal with it. Because the founders were very smart people. They knew that the Congress could become so out of touch or out of control, or might fail to address issues that need to be addressed, that they gave the states the right to propose amendments. And to ratify amendments in the same method as the 27 we have now. And the states need to ultimately step up. Now, I'm hoping Congress will do something after this becomes public. It's basically reaffirming what our group found over 3 years ago. Okay, but it's an independent, interstate, nonpartisan, official governmental body who's basically agreeing with us. And by the way, they also have discovered that we crossed the goal line again in 2016 and 2017 when Congress didn't do anything. And so if Congress doesn't do something, then I think the states are going to have to step up. The Attorney General is going to have to sue, and it's going to end up in the Supreme Court.
All right. Another case to look forward to in the United States Supreme Court. Now, when it comes to the tariffs, You said that they probably won't allow refunds of these money. If they don't, do you think they're going to go prospective and saying if they strike down the tariffs, they'll just say that you can't do future tariffs, or are they going to say that Congress didn't act, and didn't act is an action? In other words, Congress could have acted but didn't act, and hence they deferred to the executive branch, which, by the way, if they do that, then obviously the tariffs would stay in place.
My gut feeling is they're going to differentiate between ones that have been negotiated and ones that haven't, ones that may have a national security implication or public health and ones that don't. They're likely to strike down the ones that were not negotiated, that don't deal with national security or public health. They're not likely to ask or require that the government repay the money, because basically what they'll be saying is, that it was questionable until we ruled, but once we rule, it's not questionable, and therefore on a prospective basis you can't collect it anymore.
Yeah,
that's my gut. But we'll see.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. It's still that. And the thing is, when does the Federal Reserve meet on their quarter point?
Tomorrow and Wednesday.
Tomorrow and Wednesday. Okay. Yeah. See, I'm looking at a quarter point reduction also.
Yeah.
That would be our best guess that you're going to see the interest rate go down.
And I think that's what the market's expecting. They were hoping for more, but when the inflation report came out last week, I think they moderated their expectations.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't think you're going to see a half point decrease at all, and I don't think they're going to do nothing either, because it looks like you're going to run into a stagflation economy. But it still gives me pause without looking at, if you do 10-year projections, how is Congress going to maneuver in 2030, 2031, 2032 with the trust funds running out of money? I don't see the maneuverability.
The Social Security trust funds expected to run out in 2032 now. But one of the things we're seeing more people start claiming their Social Security benefits. And look, the Congress is not going to allow the trust funds to go to zero. But the question is, when are they going to reform the system? The sooner you do it, the less changes you have to make, the more transition time, the more certainty and stability, and the more you can get the power of compounding to work for you rather than against you.
Right.
But as I said, Congress is a lag indicator.
Yeah.
And they don't want to act until they have to.
Yes, and just for our audience edification, Denmark raised the retirement age on their Social Security system to age 70. So it's not unusual to see people retiring at older ages, and that may be the way it is. But right now, the way it is, we're out of time. So we don't want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and our audience in the United States and around the world. We'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.